Hi, my name is Melissa DeSormo. I am a teacher at Central Heights Elementary School, and I have a lot of background with trauma. My second master's degree is in trauma and resilience. Um, so I am very passionate about trauma, and teaching parents about trauma and people about trauma, and the effects that it can have on not only kids but adults, um, and education as well. So I'm kind of gonna go um, back and forth a little bit into the education world as a teacher and also into the parenting world of how to address that. So, first and foremost, I want to kind of get out there that when I do these lessons and these sessions, I want to make sure that you guys know that I am not ever going to teach you how to be a parent. I am not ever going to tell you that this way or this way is better than the other. My whole goal with this is to inform and allow you to have the chance to have the information that you might need to help you be a better parent. You can always ask me questions of what I think you should do or those types of things, but I'm never going to say that this way or this way is right or the other. So, with that, welcome to my presentation about parenting with trauma. So, first, I'm going to tell you about the 7 different types of trauma. So, there's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma, complex trauma, emotional trauma, generational trauma, vicarious or secondary trauma, and little t trauma. All of the traumas, the different types of traumas, have a similar effect on the brain, but produce some different outcomes and behaviors. So some are similar and be confused with one another compared to one another. Either way, there isn't going to be a quiz along the way. So there you go. I want to start out by talking about Abraham Maslow. So, Abraham Maslow was born in 1908 in Brooklyn. And he, through his research and other things, he kind of came up with what we call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This has been in the education world and psychology world for quite a while. But also, it's important to know as a parent, kind of understanding how this works and how a person's brain and body kind of work together. So, at the bottom portion, there's food, shelter, and warmth. That's the physiological stage. That is your basic needs. So, the things that you need to be able to live. So, to be able to live, I need food, I need adequate shelter, I need warmth, I need running water, I need things there for me to be able to live. And then the next step is safety and security and health. So when we refer to security and health, this isn't like being able to go to the doctor or feeling healthy or those kinds of things necessarily or security in that way. It's about feeling safe and feeling like you are protected, feeling like you are loved in enough ways that you're going to get the things that you need. So if you have food, shelter, or warmth, or anything that goes along with your basic needs, and then that next step is feeling secure in that. So if I have food one day or I don't have food the next, that's not a very good security of whether I'm going to have those available to me. The other thing is, it is adequate healthcare, as in if I am really sick and I need help that way, that somebody's going to be able to take me to the doctor and get help. A lot of the time, some things we deal with in education is teeth. And so, if you can have good health and hygiene for those are things that students, when they come into school, sometimes worry about those. And those are hard things for us to help take care of. We can help provide food, and we obviously have shelter and a warm area. And we have the basic things that they need to live, like running water in those abilities. Um, and so when you have those, it's hard to move on to the security and feeling secure and feeling loved, and that health aspect of well of staying healthy. So that's an important piece of parenting that some don't realize is that if we address the fact that they feel safe and secure in our family system, or if they are healthy, as in they eat properly, healthy things like that, then that helps them feel safe. Um, the next one is connection. So, if we feel that we have all of our basic needs met, if we feel like we are safe in our family unit or with the people that we are with, if we feel healthy or don't need any other medications or things like that to help us, or mental health to help us, then we can move on to the connection phase. And so, with the connection phase, that means we're creating connections with other adults, other people, friends, family. And connection is hard because connection kind of goes back and forth. So if we have a connection with somebody, like say we have a good connection with our mom or our dad, and then at different times they make us mad, and that happens all the time. That connection can actually be lost because of the fact that they're upset with us or we're upset with them or things like that. That connection can be lost at that time. And that just means that we need to work on restoring that connection. So then we can move on to the next piece, which is respect. So restoring those connections through restorative processes, which we'll kind of talk about that later on, is important for being able to find that respect. So if we have a connection with somebody, but if something happens to where we're upset or we lose some trust for them, it makes it harder for us to look back and respect that person, or respect that situation as well. So once we have all of our basic needs met, we feel safe and healthy, and we've created good, strong connections and relationships with people, and that has allowed us to respect those strong, healthy relationships and connections. Then we can move on to self actualization. That's really hard to say, by the way. And so we can move on to that. That is actually really hard to get to for anybody, because that is where we understand our potential, what we're worth. This is where we can learn and work hard to better ourselves. And so sometimes this doesn't always happen, especially if you are a busy parent or caregiver and you are all over the place, all over the time. It's hard for us to get past that busy phase and into making ourselves better and helping ourselves. So it's not always that we get there. There's also, it's not that it's 100% set that way, but it doesn't change much. But everything can be different on different days. So, for example, if you are hungry at one point in time, it's going to be hard. Like if you're very, very hungry, it's going to be hard for you to feel the security that I'm going to get food here in a little bit. Or it's hard to make a connection with somebody if you've been hangry before you kind of understand this, that you get frustrated with certain situations very quickly because you need food. So that's kind of a silly way to look at it, but kind of serious. But if you don't have one of these pieces, it is extremely hard for you to move on to the next step and the next step. So, being able to learn and form those connections is extremely difficult if you don't have your basic needs met, for sure, and if you don't feel safe with that person. So those are some big things to think about when we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as we go through this um, piece. So, the most known trauma is acute trauma, and this is actually what happens the least. So, a traumatic event, so this can be something that's really big trauma, like somebody in our life that was really close to us died, or we were in a really big car accident, or we suffered some really bad domestic abuse at one point in time. This could also be like physical abuse in different ways. Um, that are big in our lives that stick with us and those kinds of things, but this is actually very rare. So not many people have a really big trauma in their lives. And so even though this is what we think of when we say trauma, this is the least happening trauma. So it's one that we know a lot about, but we actually don't experience very much. So we're not going to discuss the big trauma. So the important part, and I have a really big like nerdiness for this, is the brain. So there are three levels of the brain. The primitive or reptilian or survival brain, which is that lower portion of the brain, are things that we need to be able to live for survival. So this is our brain thought process of I'm hungry, I need food. So there's that, and then there's also fear. So when we have something that is important that is happening that's really stressful, our brain kind of goes down to that primitive brain, of whether we're going to have a fight or flight response, or fear, whether we are nervous about something, how we're going to react. So then based off of that, that's where we're going to move into the emotional brain and then the cognitive brain. So the emotional brain, when we look into that, um what do we need to provide for our emotional brain? We need some things like the love and the connection, and self-belonging, and self-esteem. So we need those things to get to our emotional brain. This is where if we are upset with something but we have those resources, to not constantly be in fight or flight, we're going to be in that emotional brain. So if this is happening and we get really nervous or really scared, we might cry, we might get angry, we might need some space. So we make those decisions based off of how we feel, and we understand that feeling. We're not constantly in this is life threatening right now. This is a big situation and I'm going to react big. This is a I need to process this, and we have learned different ways to process, which is to cry, to need space, to sometimes to yell, or things like that, to get rid of those emotions. And we're not really in a survival stage, we're in an understanding stage. So then, cognitive or learning brain, has access to all of this. So we have the ability to process whether we need to be in survival mode or not, whether this is like a life or death situation, a big situation of, like we're really scared, as in we're about to get into a car accident, but what can I do to maneuver this? Can I use my driving skills to move one way or another? Do like with our most recent snowstorm, like how can I be better at driving this way or that to make choices? Whereas if we were in a survival brain, it would just be like, oh, Jesus, take the wheel, and here we go. And not be able to process what do I need to do now. So this is exactly the whole idea of reason, logic, and abstract awareness, which is like, what do I need to do now? So yes, I can, be super upset, and then I decide emotionally what I'm going to do, and I can cry, I can yell, I can do those kinds of things. I can get angry, I can hit something productive. And so I can do all of those, but then I need to be able to think through it, and have some reason, have some logic, and some realization that this is what I need to do this. How can I process this? What can I do with this information? Am I going to hold on to this information? Am I going to let go of this information? Those types of things. So that's how our brain works with our level of processing. So that goes back to Maslow's hierarchy, as we notice the levels of our brain and then also coming back here. So if we're in our primitive brain, we are looking for food, shelter, warmth, security, health. So we're looking for those kinds of things if we're in our primitive brain. If we're in our emotional brain, we're looking at our connection, our love, our belonging, sometimes even our security, because do we feel safe with this person? Do we have that connection with them to be able to open up emotionally or to do this emotionally? So that goes to those pieces. And then our cognitive brain goes to that respect, because we're processing, yes, we feel safe with this person, but do we respect this person? Do I have a connection with this person? So that might be that you are with somebody, like if you're a child and you're with a parent that you know you're safe with, but you don't really have the biggest connection with. Then that can be a little bit difficult. But you're looking at whether cognitively, you're kind of looking at this choice between, should I trust this adult? Do I not trust this adult? How do I act with this adult? Is this an adult that loves me and I'm going to give that love back to them? Or is this an adult that doesn't really like me, or doesn't have that relationship with me? And then I have a hard time giving that back. So that's kind of the thought process when you put the levels of the brain and Maslow's hierarchy kind of together. So then we're going to look at some other pieces. So, another part is the trauma brain. So, when you look at the trauma brain, there's a bunch of different parts of the brain, and the amygdala and the hippocampus are the ones that kind of respond to each other when something happens. So, when trauma happens, they can work together if you have that resiliency and that ability to come back from things, they can work together. Or if you have, a struggle with those things and processing those things and haven't been taught how to process your emotions, they don't connect well. So basically, the amygdala is the ones that puts together memories with your emotions. So, for instance, if you remember a really good time when you were younger, maybe where you went to Disney World, that's the easiest one, where you went to Disney World or you went to go do something fun with your family, you remember and feel that emotion inside. So you remember that and it makes you happy, it makes you feel good. The opposite side of that is that if you have a memory that is bad, like if you've had a traumatic situation where you've been a part of domestic violence, if you have that, then that feeling is automatically going to come back to you that you experienced in that time frame. So even though you're not experiencing it in the moment when you think of it, your body is going to feel that, and you can gain anxiety from that. And it is linked a lot to PTSD. That's the same feeling. You get the same like the same input that happens, and then it creates the same um, feeling and emotions and processes that you had in that exact moment. So a lot of like domestic abuse survivors, when it comes to that, they see an action or hear something or hear that voice or hear a sound that they heard during that time frame, and it automatically triggers your brain to think of that moment, and then it triggers your whole body to have that feeling. And then if you have those traumatic events, and it creates you into this very like primitive brain is essentially what it puts you into, then it alternates what goes to the hippocampus. So in the hippocampus is where it has all of the details of what happened. It has all those memories and holds all of that. So the amygdala has all your feelings and what's happened, and then it ties it and tags it to the memory, and then it transfers into the hippocampus. So what can happen is it is altered. So when something happens in your sensory and this emotion, it can be tagged to a certain piece of that situation that happened. So it's going to take you back. So that hippocampus is going to pull out whether it remembers the entire situation that happened or whether it remembers like a bit and piece of it. So an example of this is if you went on a vacation with your family, um, a long time ago or when you were younger, do you remember the entire thing? Or do you remember bits and pieces that really mattered to you? For example, we went on a vacation to South Carolina to go see my brother when he graduated from boot camp. And I don't remember a lot of the things, but I remember learning to whistle. I remember going to the beach. I remember my mom falling down in a parking lot and hurting herself. And then I remember being able to go to McDonald's and eat with my brother who I hadn't seen in 6 months. So those are the bits and pieces that my brain connected with, and I don't remember anything else that's in there. I just remember those parts. And those parts made me feel good about myself. And so those were happy moments that my brain connected to and put to that. So when I remember those things, like remembering learning how to whistle, I'm like, yeah, I remember how to do that. Or learning, or not learning, but remembering my mom falling in the parking lot. Like that's funny to me. So it brings back this memory and makes me giggle. And then I move on with my life. And getting to see my brother reminds me that I have that strong relationship with my brother, and that makes me feel good. Some other things that can happen on the opposite side of that is if you're a child and you witness your mom and dad fighting with one another and it gets out of control, you may not remember what happened previous to that moment. You may not remember what happened after that moment. So they may reconcile and be okay after, but that child doesn't remember that. Later on in life, they're just going to remember how their parents used to physically abuse each other. And they're going to hold on to that. They're not going to hold on to the fact that something happened after, or they're not going to hold on to the reason why it happened. They're just going to remember the fact that it happened. So they're not going to understand one way or another whether one parent was more at fault than the other or what all happened. They're just going to remember that exact event that they saw or they heard, and it's going to stick back in their brain. And that's what they're going to remember and see. And that something will trigger that to make them think of those things. So this is where I get to be a really big nerd because I absolutely love brain science, and how brain science works. And the really cool thing about brain science is it doesn't falter. It doesn't go back and forth. It's not an opinion. It's not things like that. Like this is literally they're looking at your brain and seeing exactly what your brain does and where it lights up, like where your brain is thinking. So where it lights up is where it is utilizing that part of the brain. And there's different parts of the brain that do different things. Like there's parts of the brain, obviously one side controls the other, and then there's parts that have to do with memory, and then there's parts to do with being able to see and listen and transfer information from one piece to another. There's a lot that goes on in your brain. Obviously, it's what controls the rest of your body to do things. It's what controls me to move my hands when I talk. So there's that. But this shows the typically developing brain. So that's the one on your left. It lights up everywhere that it needs to in the temporal lobe. So what happens is if you're given something that you need to think about, or it reminds you of something, or it's a positive experience, or things like that, your entire temporal lobe is going to light up and those pieces are going to be there because it's going to remember those things and it's going to create an active response in your brain. If you are exposed to trauma, neglect, or abuse, those aren't going to light up because those are things that aren't developed yet. Those are things that you can't process through. So for how this works, it's not just like, oh, your brain, this is what your brain does. This is if you are exposed to that situation. So say you have PTSD and you have a video put in front of you that you're watching that is like a reminder of what has happened to you if you were deployed somewhere and went through the war and pieces like that. If you see that, and then you're looking at the emotional response and looking at the brain response, this is what you're going to see, that there are pieces that are missing about being able to process those things because they aren't able to process things. And that's just kind of how that is. So then it kind of goes back into this. So we talked about the amygdala and the hippocampus. There we go. It's been a day. And so when you look at how to put those together, when you're processing normal, things are fine, you're able to access those memories that are there. So, like, typical information that you could pop out of your head, like if you have mental facts that you like, fact fluency that you've memorized and they're there and you're like boom 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 boom, I know these things. Or you remember reading a story and that pops out for you. Or if you're at home and you're a kid, you remember, what is my routine for the day? I wake up, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. And those are those memories. That is what I need to do, what I need to process. But if you experience trauma during the time, like during that trauma, it is really hard to bring back those memories. So that's why there's like studies that have been done that have said, you want your kid to have a good morning, a good start to his day. So that way, when they go to school or when they have their day throughout, that morning is what starts off their day. And that's exactly what happens. So when they wake up, if they wake up being yelled at, to wake up, which I'll be honest, this happens sometimes too at my own household, because my child refuses to wake up at times. And then I'm like, get out of bed. We got to go or we're going to be late. Um, Sometimes it happens. So it's not ever going to be perfect, but this is what happens when they're being yelled at or pushed, or not pushed physically, but like pushed to the point where they have to remember things and get things done and it's quick and it's stressful. This is going to be That's a simple version of not being able to remember what you're supposed to do. Um, or like when people get into big stressful situations, like there's an injury, a massive injury, and you're the one that's there and you're having to take care of the situation. And if you're very stressed out and not able to process that, you're not going to be able to remember what's supposed to happen. That's why they do specific trainings and drills, so that way you know what you're supposed to do when a big event happens and you blows all out there and you have no idea what you're supposed to do. That's why you try to keep that and be real ready for all those things. So that's kind of what we went over today. If you have any questions or thoughts or any specific questions, feel free to comment on this post or feel free to um, message me in any way. We will go over the rest of this, where we cover all the other pieces of trauma and all the other types of trauma. We will cover that in our next session. So, and if you didn't attend today's session, it's okay. If you have some questions or anything like that, if you attend the second session next week, I can help cover those. But next week we'll cover the rest of it. So I hope to see you guys there. It was a really good time today, and I absolutely loved it. So I just want to say thank you to those that came. Hopefully, you enjoy the presentation and you come next week. So.